Hey, Dane. Yeah, Dane? Why can't albacores sing? I don't know. Why is that, Dane? Because you can't tuna fish. Hey, Dane. Yeah, Dane? What kind of fish is made up of only sodium? Is it? It's tuna. It's tuna. Get it? Get it? 2 sodium atoms. 2 Na tuna. Hey, Dane. What is it, Dane? Why was the tuna able to get a PhD? Because it always stayed in schools. Hey, Dane. What is it this time, Dane? Why did the bluefin want to get to America so bad? Why is that, Dane? He heard it was the land of opportunity. Oh hey, I didn't see you there. You're listening to Bio-DIVE-rsity, the podcast about pelagic paradigms and coral curiosities, where we bring the best in flippin' fun fish facts straight to your ear holes. You're listening to part 2 of a 2-part episode series on tuna fish. If you haven't already listened to episode 5, Tune In for the Tuna, you can do so now on your favorite podcast app. Learn all about the biological and ecological side of the tuna fish. Everything from helpful bones to tactically deployable 3D maneuver gear. It's cool stuff. But there's still more cool tuna stories to cover, so let's descend. Today on the show, Tuna, Part 2. Part Tuna 2? I'll workshop that joke. Only so many puns you can make out of one fish, and I'm pretty sure I've scraped the last crusty remnants of the dregs of the bottom of that barrel. Last episode, we learned a lot about tuna, how these majestic critters are apex predators who regulate their body temperature for a high-energy lifestyle, and even how they have literal hydraulics installed for better maneuvering. But we can't talk about tuna without exploring a little bit of the relationship between mankind and this magnificent fish. Ever since ancient times, tuna has been an important source of food for people all over the world, from the Mediterranean to the coasts of North America. Since most species of tuna are highly migratory, they travel the globe and end up feeding people from Africa to Norway. Man and tuna are, in a very real sense, intertwined, and the number of intriguing stories surrounding this relationship could fill a primetime soap opera. Before I gather you around the campfire for these tuna tales, though, let's talk about which of these fish are important to us in a little bit more detail. I mentioned that there are 15 species of tuna out there, but as an incredibly important food source for humans, some of these species are a little more critical to the global fisheries. Out of all of the tuna out there, 7 are considered commercially important: the skipjack, the albacore, the big eye, the yellowfin, and all 3 species of bluefin. Each one is unique when it comes to its relationship with man, and also I can't resist getting just a few more cool fish facts in, so let's briefly cover each one of these species, why it's cool, and where you might find it on your plate. First up are the skipjack. Skipjack are the smallest of these tuna, usually about 2.5 feet or 0.8 meters in length. That's still a big fish. You'll find them out in the open ocean, usually congregating in large shoals of up to 50,000 individuals. One ecological wonder of the world, these large schools can sometimes be seen shoaling around a slow-moving adult whale shark, making for a truly spectacular sight. You'll usually see skipjack meat as canned light chunk tuna on the stateside, but in other cuisines, they like to get a lot more creative with it. In Japan, it can be used raw, seared, or smoked, and they also like to dry it out to make katsuo bushi, also known as bonito flakes. These flakes are then used in broths for soups and also sauces. Indonesian cuisine likes to cure and smoke the fish on a bamboo frame, and Hawaiian cuisine uses it in poke. Taking all of the ways that it can be used into account, it makes sense that the skipjack are the most heavily fished species of tuna in the world. One metric from Oceana International quotes that up to 60% of all legally caught tunas are skipjacks. That's a lot of fish. Of these species, when it comes to flavor, it's the one with the strongest flavor and most fishy aroma. Albacore tuna are the next largest on this list, and they usually average around 3.3 feet or about a meter in length. These guys are interesting in the fact that their diet is mostly cephalopods, as opposed to other tuna who have a more balanced diet and will kind of eat whatever they can get their jaws on. Like other tuna, they form schools that may mix with other species. When it comes to using the meat, albacore is the second most canned species in America, and it is the only tuna that is legally allowed to be called white tuna in the US. So if you ever see a can of white chunk tuna, you can be sure that you are about to eat albacore. One thing that the media has played on in recent years is the higher level of mercury in albacore specifically, leading to raised concerns over the safety of eating white tuna. Now, I'm going to go into the science behind mercury in a little bit more detail later on in the show, but the concern is a valid one, especially for young kids or a pregnant mother. But for now, know that according to the FDA, albacore is generally a safe option to eat at least once a week. Which is good, because albacore is tasty. Its meat is the lightest in coloration, and it has the mildest flavor among all of these species. It can be eaten canned, but you could also grill or pan-sear it. Albacore is typically pricier than skipjack, though. Next on the list is yellowfin, my favorite tuna. Guys, I love yellowfins. Everything from how they look to how versatile they are in the kitchen. They are graceful, they are fast, and they are delicious. They are large, but they're not the largest. They are usually around 5 feet or 1.5 meters in average length. What I love about them most is their second dorsal and anal fins, and all the potential jokes there aside, they are some of the most beautiful structures in this fish. Both of these fins are bright yellow, causing the namesake of this fish, and can grow to be incredibly long in mature individuals. They have this gorgeous curve to them, almost like a scimitar. And together they form this gorgeous C shape that just cuts through the water. They also usually have metallic blue dorsal scales, changing from blue to this shimmering silver on the underside of the fish. This all makes for one incredibly beautiful fish. Sometimes, too, you'll even see a yellowfin jump out of the water, scales glistening in the sunlight, curved fins arcing through the air like a magnificent blade. It's so poetic. These fish are really fast, too. Some of them have clocked upwards of 47 miles per hour. Now, their meat, yellowfin meat, is naturally pale pink, but they boast a mild and delicious flavor that's just a tad more pronounced than the albacore. You'll see yellowfin canned very occasionally, but more than likely you're going to see this tuna seared up in nice, rare steaks, in fish tacos, or in sushi and sashimi. Also, fun note, in restaurants, yellowfin tuna can also be called ahi tuna. So when you see ahi tuna on the menu, you can be sure that you're eating yellowfin, right? Wrong, it's a trick question. When restaurants specify ahi tuna, it could be yellowfin or the next species on the list, big eye. Ahi is a Hawaiian word, and in Hawaii, it actually refers to both species. So when you order ahi, you could be getting either, though yellowfin is the most likely. Big eye tuna are just a titch bigger on average than the yellowfins, averaging around 5.9 feet or 1.8 meters in length. They trade out that super long second dorsal and anal fin for longer pectoral ones. Big eye tuna are unique in the tuna world for having a particular tolerance to low oxygen environments. Some studies have shown that big eyes can tolerate oxygen concentrations as low as 1.0 milliliters of oxygen per liter of water. That's incredibly hypoxic to any other fish. For reference, normal seawater has average concentrations of around 4.5 to 9 milliliters of oxygen per liter, so that is a drastic reduction. In addition to that, they have quite large eyes, the namesake of the fish, that are well developed and give them superior low-light vision. Both of these features tend to work in the big eye's favor, as they tend to generally descend to deep, potentially oxygen-low and darker waters during the day. In terms of food, big eye tuna is usually bright red and firm, and it has a higher fat content than the yellowfin, leading to a bit of a richer flavor. In fact, in high-end sushi restaurants, a good piece of Big Eye sashimi can go for over $20. But if you think that's crazy, then our next tuna is going to blow your mind. I am, of course, talking about the world-famous king of the tuna, the largest, the fastest, and the fiercest tuna in the sea. This fish can sell for over $333 million per specimen. This is the critically endangered bluefin tuna. There are 3 species of bluefin that were, for a long time, considered all to be the same species, but now they are separated into these 3: the southern bluefin, the Atlantic bluefin, and the Pacific bluefin. These kings of the sea are huge, averaging around 6.5 feet or 2 meters in length, and weighing hundreds and hundreds of pounds. This is the most prized fish in all of tuna land, and that is due entirely to its meat. It's usually dark red, full of beautiful marbled fat, and the belly meat, also known as toro, just melts in your mouth when it's eaten. A single piece of bluefin sushi could cost up to $200. Now, I've never tasted bluefin tuna myself, and honestly, I'm hoping to keep it that way, at least for a while. For as incredible as the meat sounds, the lucrative demand for this fish has caused wild stocks to absolutely plummet, reaching statistics as low as 4% of the historical population. The IUCN lists southern bluefin and Atlantic bluefin as critically endangered and endangered respectively. Even the Pacific bluefin is listed as threatened, so that is enough to keep it off of my plate personally. Maybe one day, if we manage the stocks that we have in any sort of adequate fashion, and our stocks return to a level that is sustainable, then maybe I'll be able to taste this amazingly delicate and flavorful meat, but until then, I'm okay waiting. That's quite the long-winded list, for sure, but it's cool to me that each of these commercially important tuna species are unique in some way. Part of being a smart consumer is having the knowledge about exactly what you are buying, and being able to put species names to the name you see on a can or on a menu really helps with that. Speaking of consumerism, tuna is one of the most fished and most valuable meats on the market today. But it wasn't always like this. So how did we even get to this multi-million-dollar industry? To answer that question, my friends, it's time to gather round the fire on the beach, gaze at the waves meeting the sandy shoreline, and tell the first in our anthology of tuna tales. The tale of man and fish truly begins in the 1900s, off the beautiful coastlines of Southern California. The year is 1903. The United States is smack dab in the middle of its second industrial revolution. Machines, advanced communication, and transportation innovations were becoming more and more commonplace. World War I was still more than 10 years away. In a factory close to the shifting waters of San Pedro Bay, California, we find the subject of this tale, a man by the name of Albert Powers Halfhill. Halfhill was a grocery man. Most of his career centered around getting the American people food, selling groceries from Ohio to Minnesota. He had ended up in California out of concern for his wife, who was having health problems. They wanted the more favorable environment of Southern California's coastlines, a stark difference from the cold Minnesotan winters. Halfhill had, 10 years prior, taken advantage of a unique opportunity. By partnering with a wealthy merchant, he bought packing machinery from a failed packing company and constructed a packing factory on Terminal Island, and Halfhill went into business in the new game of canning sardines. Through wit, determination, and smart partnerships, he made a successful business. Sardine packing had been prosperous for Halfhill for the last 10 years. But then, disaster struck. In that year, 1903, the sardine harvest in San Pedro Bay failed. Where once there had been plentiful, delicious fish keeping the cannery going, there were now only a few. Nobody knew how or why, but the consequence was clear. Halfhill had to think, and fast, or risk his business going under. And flex his creative muscle he did. He thought back to his travels, where he remembered picking up Italian canned tuna. He wondered if other fish might be the key to saving his plant. And thus began a period of experimentation. Haeckel began looking at cod, halibut, and albacore. What he eventually discovered would change the course of tuna in America forever, for good or for ill. Up until this point, albacore had largely been considered unattractive food, near-on trash that was unfit to be consumed by a sensible person. But Haeckel would not be dissuaded. Over the course of his investigations, he invented a unique process. He would steam the fish flesh, which turned the flesh white and improved the flavor. The process, he found, removed most of the natural fish oils, though, so in order to combat this, he would replace those oils with different ones, like olive oil or cottonseed oil. This not only improved the appearance of the eventual canned product, but it also improved the flavor and gave the meat a texture much like chicken. In order to disguise his product from being known as albacore, he called his product the chicken of the sea, a slogan you're likely to have heard even today. It took a while for his product to catch on. The first shipments of canned tuna were actually largely returned by the grocers. In a bold marketing attempt, Haeckel convinced some of the grocers to give his canned tuna away for free with the purchase of coffee. And miraculously, it worked. Americans discovered that they liked the mild taste of the white meat, and by 1908, Haeckel had begun selling his new product by the case. Even people as far off as New York began getting the taste of tuna, and it caught on quick. By 1912, canning companies were shipping around 115,000 cases of canned tuna per year, with production doubling 2 years later at the brink of World War I. More canneries began to open up and to pack tuna, and Albert P. Haeckel would later earn the moniker of Father of the Tuna Packing Industry. Haeckel's story may have ended with his albacore legacy, but demand for canned tuna only skyrocketed from there. By the 1920s, bluefin, yellowfin, and skipjack tuna were being caught and canned alongside albacore to meet the demand. More fisheries cropped up throughout the 1940s and 1950s as tuna became a truly global fish. Bait boats began cropping up in Europe, Mexico, and even in Japan, where our tuna storyline continues. Canned tuna is only one aspect of man's relationship with this magnificent fish. But, just like a sordid love affair, this relationship gets twisted when we look at the history of one of today's most commercially valuable fish. And I'm talking the bluefin tuna. If you're like me, you are probably under the impression that bluefin tuna, one of today's most valuable fish in both sushi and sashimi, is an authentic Japanese tradition. But what if I told you that that story was just a huge lie? In the first half of the 1900s, in both Japan and America, bluefin tuna was considered a trash fish, just like the albacore. In the States, sport fishermen tossed their catches after weighing them, or sold them for pennies to be ground up for cat and dog food. In Japan, the fish had a history of only being eaten by the poorest of the poor. Nobody wanted the bloody, tangy, fatty meat of the fish. That is, until the 1970s. Beef had become popular in Japan. American markets began to open up sushi restaurants. The taste for dark red meats developed in both of these markets, and bluefin tuna began to shift from what one source called a fish that even a cat would disdain to a highly desired item. Noticing the market shift and hoping to take advantage of empty cargo space on return trips from delivering electronics, Japanese airlines bought cheap fish carcasses from the States to try to sell them in Japan. After all, the American fishermen wanted no part of them. They were in it purely for the sport of the catch. This was right around the time of the invention of freezer technology, too. The ability to freeze the carcasses meant the fish could now be kept fresher longer, and this in turn enabled and encouraged the use of raw fish in sushi and sashimi. The airline ploy was very successful. It turned pennies into thousands of dollars. By the 1990s, bluefin tuna was a delicacy, and the whole world wanted a piece of the action. After all, with a new taste for red meat, the bluefin meat, especially that fatty belly part, the toro, is very easy to like. It melts in your mouth with that tangy, distinct flavor. So to chase this delicacy, fisheries began moving out into international waters and developing unique and novel ways to catch the species. Some agreements were made, but with poor regulation on how much each individual country could catch, bluefins were landed by the netful. Some countries did stay within their agreed-upon limits, but others disregarded them, fishing entirely past their quotas. Regardless, the market boomed. You can probably see where this is going. In the last 30 years, what was an incredibly healthy and vibrant stock of southern bluefin tuna has dwindled to a mere 4 to 7% shadow of its former self. Universally, it's estimated that these stocks are down 80% worldwide. Bluefin tuna are scarce across all 3 species, but no less prized. Just last year, NPR reported that a 612-pound Pacific bluefin tuna sold at a Tokyo fish market for $333.6 million. That's over 5,000 US dollars per pound. All of this for a fish that was once considered no better than trash, barely fit for animals. Maybe it would have been better if it had stayed that way. This isn't to say that we should knee-jerk reaction this and take all tuna off of our plates forever. It is actually possible to conserve the species in such a way that they provide food for us without us completely overfishing them and taking them to their eventual extinction. This is good news, because the meteoric rise in tuna's popularity as a food item isn't just because of the taste. It turns out it's also incredibly good for you, too. You know, we live in times where manufacturers and merchants can slap whatever "this food is healthy" for you claims on a product with little to no actual scientific backing. And how depressing that is aside, this makes navigating the minefield of what you should and shouldn't put into your body very, very difficult. But that's where science can help. So let's take a break from the stories for a second and delve back into the science, and look a little bit into the meat of this subject. See what I did there? We'll start with the big one, the claims you've probably heard over and over again on the TV and radio.
Reduce chances of heart disease, prevent Alzheimer's, cure your depression. Take fish oil, high in omega-3 fatty acids that your body needs today.
Oh yeah, one of the co-gods of the health food buzzwords, right up there with antioxidants. We're talking about omega-3s, baby. The meat of oily fish, like herring, sardines, salmon, and of course tuna, is quite high in these omega-3 fatty acids, and the food industry won't let you forget it. The name omega-3s actually refers to a lot of different chemical substances, but as much as I want to get into the confusing chemistry of these, that particular part is not important to this point. What is important to know is that as mammals, our bodies can't actually make these acids ourselves, so we have to get them from our diet. Studies have shown that they play a key role in brain function, lowering inflammation levels, and the growth and development of our kids. It's important stuff, but a miracle cure? You know, I can't believe the number of ads and claims out there regarding omega-3s. Those notorious they-sayers will tell you that taking fish oil supplements for their omega-3 content will lengthen your lifespan, treat your depression, provide a stalwart shield against heart disease. Heck, some claims even say it reduces your risk of cancer. You know, far be it from my place to look into the actual science of such claims, but that's what I did anyways. So, are omega-3s the cure-all that cures all? Well, the science says it's a solid maybe. Studies for these types of things are very hard to perform, and the data we get from them is very hard to interpret. But as of now, the studies are all over the place. Some provide data that supports these claims, while others provide data that contradicts it. So as of now, we don't really have any solid evidence to substantiate these miracle claims. But I want to reiterate that doesn't mean that fish oil is snake oil. Even though the mechanisms of how food affects the body is still largely a mystery, we do know that omega-3s are important. Just keep in mind that we can't say for sure that if it's entirely due to the omega-3s themselves, or if the full benefits come from the entire symphony of nutrients that make up the food that we eat. So, if you take any message away from here, it's this. Are omega-3s healthy? Yes. You just might be better off getting them from a food source instead of a pill supplement. Flax oil, chia oil, walnuts, and of course, fish. Tuna is a pretty darn good source of omega-3s. Score another goal. The second big factor in tuna nutrition is protein. Tuna is an excellent source of protein, and not just any protein either. This stuff is high quality. Tuna meat beats out both beef and chicken in protein content, and this protein is one of the best sources of amino acids that your body can use. I won't get too much into the science here, but it's important to remember that amino acids are the building blocks that make up proteins, and proteins, well, they do just about everything in your body, from nutrient transport to DNA replication. And tuna meat is a straight powerhouse, delivering all the amino acids that you can only get from food and in a high-as-heck dose. What's more, cooking the tuna doesn't actually appear to affect the quality of that protein. Both heat processing and canning procedures were tested, and it was found that the amino acid content remained essentially the same. In terms of straight numbers, 3 ounces of tuna packs a walloping 25 grams of protein. That's about half the FDA recommended daily value of 50 grams protein for adults. And to be honest, most tuna steaks I've gotten at restaurants are way more than 3 ounces. And as a curiosity, and just for fun, I looked at the bottle of protein powder that I have at home. I wanted a comparison to a food that's literally made to provide protein. 1 scoop of that stuff has 22 grams of protein. Goes to show just how much of a powerhouse tuna really is. You know, between these facts, there's no doubt that tuna is quite healthy for you. Including it in your dietary rotation does have benefits. Excellent high-quality protein, relatively low in calories, and low in those bad fats, instead offering omega-3s to help your brain think good and stuff. But there's another side to this coin. It's a dark side that haunts the world of tuna meat, ensuring that it's not all miracle claims in sushi heaven. Mercury. You've probably already heard the claims that you and your children are in danger. That a dangerous element is lurking in the food we eat, invisible to our eyes and impossible to detect with taste. That within this seemingly tasty, healthy, and affordable food lies a deadly poison. One that, once consumed in large enough quantity, will affect your brain and spinal cord badly enough to cause blindness, motor function impairment, neurological damage, and even death. And the scary part? Some of this horrific yarn is true. A compound called methylmercury does exist within fish like tuna, and high enough levels of the stuff are extremely toxic. But before you pick up your torches and take to the streets, let's put together a full picture of what this toxin is, how it gets into tuna and other foods, and just how much you should be concerned. The answer is, spoiler alert, a little, but not a lot if you're smart about it. So the first question, what is mercury? When we say mercury in this context, scientists and health officials are actually referring to methylmercury, which is just one of many forms of the element mercury. You know, that stuff that used to fill old-timey thermometers before it was deemed a health risk? Yeah, that stuff. Elemental mercury in the pure form is naturally occurring within the Earth's crust, and usually only gets released into the environment through volcanic activity or erosion. But this natural process has been sped up greatly recently from, can you guess what I'm going to say? I bet you can, can't you? Mercury release has been greatly sped up by human activity! Mining, coal burning, and waste incineration all heighten the levels of mercury in the environment. Once that mercury is free, it can be used by bacteria, which transforms it into methylmercury. You know, the dangerous stuff. A quick side note here, because science is confusing and scientists really like to use similar sounding words for completely different things, methylmercury is completely different from ethylmercury. I mention this because ethylmercury has been used in various vaccines as a preservative. Methylmercury is a dangerous toxic compound, while ethylmercury doesn't even pose a health risk, according to the WHO. Confusing, huh? Anyway, once inside your body, methylmercury gets readily absorbed by your gastrointestinal tract, where it binds to cysteine, which is an amino acid, as well as cysteine-containing compounds. In layman's terms, the toxin actually just latches on to these cysteine compounds and a new chemical is born. What's truly both scary and fascinating about this is that new compound born from the toxin tagging on actually mimics another amino acid called methionine. So remember how earlier I said that amino acids are basically the building blocks that our body uses to make proteins? Methylmercury takes advantage of that. It hijacks free cysteine, and the body sees that hijacked compound and just goes, "Yup, that's methionine, we need that for construction," and will transport it to other places in the body. It gets a little bit worse, too, where our brains are concerned. Our brains have this layer of protection against bad pathogens that we call the blood-brain barrier. It's almost exactly what it says on the tin, a structure between the cells of the brain and the bloodstream that is hyper-selective with what it lets in to see the brain cells. If you metaphorically think of the brain as a romanticized medieval castle, the blood-brain barrier is kind of like the high castle walls, the moat, and the overly critical gate guard all rolled into one. But methylmercury, the crafty assassin that it is, uses its false identity while bound to cysteine to fool the gate guard and be allowed free access into the brain. This is why we see that methylmercury poisoning can have detrimental neurological effects. It can literally get into and screw up your brain. But in order to do this, it has to get into your body in the first place. So then the second question is, how does it get into tuna and other fish to begin with? Two key ecological concepts that are of note here are bioaccumulation and biomagnification. It kind of sound like fancy words that the chief scientific officer on a sci-fi program would say, huh? "Captain, the scans show high levels of mercury bioaccumulation on the planet's surface." Yet they're fairly logical concepts. The idea goes like this. Mercury gets released into the water and the sediment where bacteria will transform it into methylmercury. Methylmercury in the water column exists in pretty low concentrations, but it is easily absorbed by algae. Since both these bacteria and algae are at the bottom of the food chain, they get eaten by small fish and other organisms higher up on the chain, where the methylmercury finds a new home. Fish also readily absorb methylmercury just like us, while getting rid of it very slowly. These small fish are in turn eaten by bigger fish, who eat several of them. The bigger fish, having consumed several small fish with low levels of mercury, now have moderate levels of mercury. Then, several of these moderately contaminated fish are in turn consumed by the handful of bigger apex predators that exist. By the end of the food chain, you have these apex predators swimming around with high levels of mercury buildup just due to the sheer number of contaminated fish that they've eaten. This buildup of the toxicant in an individual, be it human or fish, is what we call bioaccumulation. The overall process of the toxicant concentration getting higher as it climbs the chain due to simply eating more of it is what we call biomagnification. It kind of makes sense, right? This is how high levels of methylmercury get into the tuna that we eat. Tuna are, as we previously mentioned, pretty high up on the food chain after all. And we eat the tuna, meaning that we can potentially bioaccumulate methylmercury in our bodies simply by eating the fish. Scary, right? But don't panic and throw the tuna sandwich out the window just yet, because there's one more question to this story. That's our third question. How much should you be concerned? You can't avoid methylmercury exposure. It happens to most all of us. In fact, it's highly likely you'll be ingesting traces of mercury regardless of the seafood that you eat. Like a lot of dangerous things, the dose makes the poison. There are really only a few scenarios where you should be concerned with methylmercury poisoning. First, and most rare, you are directly exposed to mercury due to something like an industrial accident. If you inadvertently inhaled mercury, then yeah, you should probably be concerned. Yet, you probably don't have to worry about this one too much unless you work as a miner or in a similar industrial field. Be safe out there, workers. The second scenario, you are chronically exposed to high methylmercury levels. Your body does naturally get rid of methylmercury, it just takes an extraordinarily long time to do so. So the more often you eat it, the higher levels you will accumulate in your body. So if you happen to be eating tuna almost every single day, there might be a little bit of cause for concern. The third case, you are pregnant, might become pregnant, or are a growing child. Studies have shown that fetuses are especially susceptible to mercury from fish and shellfish consumed by the mother. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't eat fish. Far from it. The health benefits are still good for you and your child. You just want to choose fish that are lower in mercury, like the skipjack. If this situation applies to you, the FDA has released a guidance on what fish are best and how much is good to eat, and I'll go ahead and link that guidance in the show notes. But for tuna, it boils down to canned light skipjack being okay 2 to 3 times per week, and yellowfin or albacore being alright about once a week. I love sushi and a good tuna steak or fish tacos, and the health benefits are still incredible. So personally, I eat tuna about once or twice a week, and I don't plan on stopping. The health benefits are great, and as long as I don't go overboard, I should be able to enjoy this delicious delight for years to come. While to a lot of people, good quality tuna meat is a treat to be savored, to others it is a crucial source of food. People rely on tuna fish for sustenance. They almost always have. This relationship has stood since almost the dawn of humanity, and this reliance is the focus of our next story of the intertwined fates between fish and man. This one's not exactly a fun story. It's a scary tale of how bad things can truly get when humanity puts profits over people. It's a dark tale of corporate cover-ups, immense suffering, and organized crime. The setting is Minamata, a nice bayside city in southern Japan. A city whose legacy was poisoned, literally, by ignorance and negligence. Between the years of 1932 and 1968, a factory in the area was releasing a good majority of its waste into the nearby bay. A chemical manufacturer, the waste wasn't exactly the type of stuff you'd want to take a bath in. The factory, owned by the Chiso Corporation, was contaminating the wildlife with this discharge, which, you guessed it, was high in methyl mercury. Now, the bay supported many locals, and many people caught and consumed the fish and shellfish in the area. During this time, and as a direct result of the irresponsible waste disposal, a strange new disease sprang up in the area. Between this 34-year period, affected people suffered intense symptoms of brain damage. Incoherent speech, loss of vision, and loss of muscle coordination were common. In more extreme cases, insanity, paralysis, and even death plagued the victims. At least 50,000 people were affected. Today, this outbreak is known as Minamata disease. The disease ran rampant, and the Chiso Corporation did very little to stop it. In fact, even though the crisis started in 1932, it wasn't until 1959 that the cause was even identified as the heavy metal mercury, and Chiso became the prime suspect. But even then, the corporation did very little to cooperate with the research team investigating the disease. They withheld information, funded their own research to point the finger elsewhere, and even changed their dump site to a river to cover it up, killing off the river wildlife and affecting a greater area of the ocean than before. Victims of Minamata disease had been suffering for years, and when the cause was identified in 1959, things boiled to a fever pitch, when in response to overwhelming public outcry and an official decree from the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, Chiso Corporation was ordered to stop dumping waste in the river, install appropriate wastewater treatment systems to treat their waste, and then resume disposal in the bay. On December 19, 1959, a special ceremony was held to unveil what Chiso called the cyclator, a water purification system that purified the waste before its eventual discharge. To show compliance with the order and public faith, the president of Chiso at the time drank a glass of water that had been purified by the system, to show that it was both clean and safe. With the installation of the cyclator, the case on Minamata disease had been shut, and the epidemic was going to be over. Or it would have been if Chiso hadn't lied about the entire thing. As it turns out, the cyclator was completely ineffective. It had been installed as a deception, and the glass of water stunt, a falsehood perpetrated to get the public off the corporation's back. And the thing is, it worked. The official government report called an end to the outbreak in 1960. It was over in the minds of the unaffected populace. But the true epidemic was still to last for years to come. Chiso didn't stop using the process responsible for the mercury contamination until 1969, 10 years after the cyclator stunt, and victims still suffered. These 10 years between the cyclator lie and the actual end of their mercury pollution are now called the Years of Silence. The victims tried to go after Chiso for damages. Protests raged in the streets with people holding aloft pictures of lost loved ones. But Chiso never admitted fault, only agreeing to pay what they called sympathy money to some of the affected families. Only out of altruistic concern for their well-being, of course, not because the company was responsible for any damages. For many, there was no justice done. Meanwhile, the disease continued to rampage. Babies were being born with a congenital version of the disease, and patients were still dying. Only this time, the causes of death were being marked as unknown. The corruption ran so deep that Chiso used ties with Yakuza, Japanese organized crime syndicates, to silence any new information from surfacing. These Yakuza would threaten patients of the disease to silence them just to protect the corporation's leaders. The victims could once again do nothing but suffer in silence. There was no peace, no justice. The victims of Chiso's negligence needed a voice, and it took a hero to make their voice finally heard. In 1971, an American photojournalist named W. Eugene Smith arrived in Minamata alongside his wife, Eileen Miyoko Smith. Having made a name creating the new field of the photographic essay, it was easy for the pair to see that not all was right in Minamata. Quickly, they became concerned for the disease victims and enraged at the ones responsible for the suffering that they saw on a daily basis. So they used the power of their craft to fight back. They began work on a new essay, a report to bring worldwide attention to the horrors of the disease. Smith took one of his most famous photographs during this time, a piece called Tomoko Imura in her bath. It shows a mother cradling her severely deformed daughter Tomoko aloft in the gentle waters of a warm bath. The photograph was raw, intimate, and deeply startling. It was going to show the world the horrors of the disease. But somehow Chiso caught wind of Smith's work. In the middle of the essay's creation, in January of 1972, Smith was attacked by Yakuza at the request of the company. They wanted to keep him silent, to keep his photos from the eyes of the world. But perhaps as divine providence, or as a final backswing in karma's pendulum, he survived the attack, though he suffered great damage to one of his eyes, rendering him unable to work. But he wouldn't give up, as Smith's wife Eileen continued his work while he was recovering and unable to work himself. Eugene and Eileen's essay was finally published in 1975, and 43 years after the pollution began, the world finally took note. All of the work and dedication to the victims of this disease finally began to shine a ray of hope. Truth finally surfaced, and the scales of justice could finally be righted. However, it still takes time for action and healing. Though compensation has been paid to some, lawsuits would rage over the next several decades, and some continue even to this day. There are victims that are still living today. Most patients suffering from congenital Minamata disease are now in their 40s and 50s, and are often limited to their own homes due to the symptoms of the disease. They're isolated and often in the care of their ever-aging parents. Little exists in the way of welfare for them. All of this suffering, all for the sake of a lie, for the sake of profit. The horrendous symptoms of Minamata disease and the horrible effects of the pollution on the environment and the fish therein is unfortunately a valuable lesson. Mankind is intertwined with the world, and what we do to our planet and the creatures on it will inevitably come back around to affect us too. In this case, the tuna and other fish of Minamata Bay had to serve as an envoy of this harsh truth. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge? Will we simply let it pass us by and let tragedy strike again? Or will we use it as a weapon in the fight to heal the scars and mistakes of our past? This kind of knowledge is so incredibly powerful. I know that when everyone talks about the ocean these days, the doom and gloom of these kinds of issues facing it come part and parcel with that conversation, which is totally a bummer. But here's the thing. Each failure, each success, and each study with all of the lessons learned contribute to an ever-expanding body of knowledge that we can use to turn the tide. Tuna have provided for us for centuries, and we now have a very real opportunity to use this knowledge to pay them back for everything that they've given us. If we don't, we stand a very real chance of losing them forever. So our final tale this hour of Man and Fish is one of hope. An example of how we can do better, not only for ourselves and for our children, but for the fish who have taken care of us for so long. This tale picks up 28 years past, in the large swaths of water between Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. The year is 1993, and the star of the show? The southern bluefin tuna. With the human population rocketing upward on its ceaseless and meteoric rise, tuna fishing has expanded and evolved. New techniques are utilized to catch an ever-dwindling supply, everything from longline fishing to purse seining to special floating fish aggregating devices to attract wild schools to then be caught. With fishermen getting smarter and the world getting hungrier, stocks of the tuna were plummeting, and people were beginning to see a problem. Almost 30 years ago now, we were already realizing that the once plentiful stocks of southern bluefins were in trouble. Concerned sport anglers could only tell tales of the days they used to be able to catch this wonderful fish. Since 1985, there had been some loose management of southern bluefin stocks between the nations primarily fishing them, namely Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Yet, these quotas were largely unenforceable, and the populations kept nosediving. Clearly, the agreed-upon measures were not working. To combat this problem, these loose agreements morphed into an official organization, the Commission for the Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna, or the CCSBT for less of a mouthful. It was an organization as well as a pact between these nations that, in 1994, started operating in full force. The Commission would be responsible for the global management of the southern bluefin fishery, not a small task. The Commission's responsibility involves, among other things, conducting and interpreting scientific studies of the fishery, and, with that data, setting allowable catch quotas for each of its member countries to set the course for bluefin recovery. That task alone is very hard to do. The fish is quite long-lived. Average lifespans are 20 to 40 years for a single fish, and it's believed that the fish don't actually reach spawning maturity until they're between 9 and 12 years old. Add on top of that the fish stocks are migratory and travel huge distances, mandating a need for cooperation between the nations whose waters they pass through. If you're like me, the kind of person who struggles to figure out where to go for dinner with your friends, just imagine trying to get entire nations to collaborate, share data, and stay true to agreed catch limits. And even though Japan, Australia, and New Zealand were three of the biggest players in this fishery, other nations like South Korea, Indonesia, and the Philippines also had roles to play. The goal was clear, but the path to get there, less so. It's taken time, and it's still very far from perfect, but since the year the Commission formed, there have been several wins, alongside several losses. Since 2000, other nations have joined the Commission, agreeing to cooperate, doing the same things like sharing their catch data and staying within their catch quotas that they're assigned. But for every few steps forward like this, there have been a few back. So much so that it almost plays out like a really bad high school drama. South Korea and Taiwan join the Commission, and then Australia blames Japan for overfishing and falsely reporting data, cutting their quota as a punishment. Indonesia joins, and quotas were reduced. And then Japan expressed concerns over Australia now falsely reporting their catch data, which resulted in Australia implementing a video evidence system to verify their own catches, which lasted only a year before Australia withdrew, citing that it was too expensive to keep up. And during all of this time, with all the wins, losses, and bickering, stocks continued to fall despite the Commission's efforts. But all of this time, scientists were busy collecting data and working with the governments to formulate plans. New experiments into tuna ranching and tuna farming were being carried out. Despite the difficulty in raising an ocean-wandering fish in captivity, there have been some successes. Commercial fishing boats and recreational fishermen alike have begun to help scientists to tag and monitor fish. Somehow, some way, governments, industries, and people, all of them began to cooperate. It turns out that people, despite a tendency to yell and blame others for what is truly a global problem, still saw the value in working together and still wanted to work their hardest to save the southern bluefin. Finally, it appears we may be reaching a turning point. In the last 10 years, when things have seemed their bleakest, a small ray of hope has shined out into the blue. From that low, scary number of 4% original total biomass, an assessment conducted in 2017 estimated that stocks were now at 13%. And while the data still appears to be being reviewed at the time of this recording, another assessment made last year in 2020 estimates that that number has gone up yet again. It's funny to think that a return to a mere 13% of the original number of fish on this earth is something worth celebrating, but it absolutely is. It may not be a return to the wild, primal seas of yore, but it represents something important. We only got here through cooperation. Scientists working together to provide data to regulatory agencies and governments, who set data-informed limits and reporting requirements, which then the industries and recreational fishing enthusiasts must follow. Those same industries and individuals then help gather more data, reporting it back to the scientists, who revise, rethink, and replan to meet the changing tides. The cycle continues, and everyone feels a sense of ownership in the process. No one part of this circle can stand on its own. But when it works, the motion is almost magical. We see people taking responsibility, and more than that, taking pride in the work that they are undertaking. We see smiling faces as these people pass along the efforts of their own hard work, the proverbial torch to be carried and lifted ever higher. We see shared passions colliding for the benefit of a common goal. And above all else, we see the return of the tuna. This is just one species and just a handful of nations, and the work to get here was monumentally difficult. But it's a proof of concept that can't and shouldn't be ignored. It proves that not all is doomed, that if we reach out with all of our intellect, passion, and might, we can truly make a change that sustains us and sustains the Earth. And this proof is already having profound impacts. Countries and consumers around the globe are starting to see the value of responsibly caught and farmed fish and demanding better for the future. New technologies in data collection, from gene tagging to camera-captured fishing data, have been rapidly developing. If you need more proof of the positive impacts of responsible fishing, a story published by the World Wildlife Fund in May of 2019 talks about Ghana's tuna fleet, and how they are blazing the way towards a program of electronic monitoring of the tuna boats and catches. All of this data from their monitored catches works towards similar goals of catch quotas and conservation. And, as a bonus, this new need for data analysis has opened a previously closed door for a few women in Ghana, who in turn hope to open that door for other women. One good turn opens up another. The tuna truly is a remarkable creature. Years and years of evolution have honed its form to sheer, streamlined artistry. Its biology is incredible, from the warmth of their bodies to the mechanics of their swimming. Each one is unique, their meat is nutritious, and absolutely delicious. I'm always happy when I encounter tuna, whether it's watching in awe of their underwater athleticism, or enjoying seared yellowfin in a good fish taco. And, like a good friend, tuna has been there for humanity almost since the dawn of our species. We've shared a lot of Earth's story together. It's kind of funny when you think about it that way. They're literally the friend that's always there for you no matter what, never asking anything in return. They provide us with excellent nutritional food, entertainment, sport, beauty, and more. Don't you think it's time we started giving back? After all, if you don't appreciate the friends that you have and all that they do for you, they might just be lost forever. And, as earth-loving hippie as this sounds, we are intertwined. If we don't take care of the tuna, it will come back around to bite us. Hard. So, I hope that the next time you encounter the word tuna, on a menu or at the aquarium, I hope it's less of an, no, tuna, sweet, alright, and more of a, "Ah, sweet tuna, I appreciate you, you magnificent creature." I have no doubt that this healthy appreciation and respect will breed a new sense of how to care for these creatures. It has begun to work for the southern bluefin, and I have no doubt that we can chart a similar course for the other species. So together, let's raise our voices so that we might see less tragedies like Minamata and more wins like the southern bluefin. Together, the tale of man and fish does not have to end here. That's it for this episode of Biodiversity. Thanks for listening. If you liked these awful fish jokes and tuna storytime, please recommend the show to your loved ones and friends, and leave a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps spread the word and get the podcast out there. I'm a firm believer in education as a means of long-term change, so take this tuna knowledge and chant it in the streets. Okay, maybe don't do that, but if you found it interesting, maybe your friends and family will as well. I hope you'll keep tunaing in. I'll see you guys next time.